Valeria woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Georgetown townhouse, Daniel's arm draped across her waist with the comfortable weight of habit. 6 months of marriage had settled into a rhythm she hadn't known she craved, the quiet intimacy of shared mornings, coffee brewed while one showered, newspapers read in companionable silence before the demands of their respective positions pulled them into the world. She turned in his arms, careful not to wake him yet, studying his face in the gentle light. Even in sleep, Daniel carried himself with that particular discipline, his features composed, his breathing measured. But here, in these unguarded moments, she could see the softness he showed only to her, the slight curve of his mouth, the relaxation in his jaw. "You're staring," he murmured without opening his eyes, observing. "Is there a difference?" His eyes opened, warm and teasing. "When I do it, yes." She kissed him softly. "Good morning, Senator Park." "Good morning, Madam Minister." The title still felt new, though she'd held the position of Mexico's Minister of Importation and Trade for 3 months now. The appointment had been strategic. President Salazar needed someone who understood international commerce at the highest level, someone with credibility in both Mexico and the United States. Valeria's marriage to Daniel had made her visible. Her expertise had made her undeniable. "What time is your committee meeting?" she asked, tracing her fingers along his shoulder. 10. You? Cabinet session at noon, then the trade symposium at 3. She sighed. "I need to be brilliant and charming for 4 hours straight while men twice my age explain my own policies back to me." Daniel's expression darkened with protective anger. "Still getting that?" "Always. Yesterday, the agriculture minister suggested I was too young to remember the NAFTA negotiations." She smiled without humor. I reminded him I wrote my graduate thesis on NAFTA's failure points. He didn't appreciate the correction. "Their limitation, not yours?" "I know, but it's exhausting, being underestimated constantly." She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. "Sometimes I miss just running my company. At least there, my competence was never questioned." Daniel propped himself on one elbow, looking down at her. "Do you regret accepting the appointment?" Valeria considered the question seriously. The ministerial position gave her unprecedented access to shape policy, to legitimize the infrastructure she'd built while expanding it under governmental protection. But it also meant constant scrutiny, endless political maneuvering, and sacrificing the privacy that had protected her operations for years. "No," she said finally. "This is what we planned: legitimacy through visibility, power through official channels. But I didn't anticipate how personal the attacks would be, how much they'd focus on my race, my gender, my marriage to you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What are they saying?" "That I'm a diversity appointment. That I only got the position because Salazar wanted to appeal to Afro-Mexican voters. That I'm using my marriage to an American senator to undermine Mexican sovereignty." She laughed bitterly. "Last week, a columnist suggested I was a pretty face meant to distract from Mexico's trade weaknesses." "That's—" Daniel's anger was palpable. "Give me the name. I'll—" "You'll do nothing," Valeria said firmly, though she appreciated his instinct to defend her. "I don't need you fighting my battles. I need you trusting that I can fight them myself." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just remember that I'm not fragile." She turned to face him again, her hand on his cheek. "I chose this path knowing it would be difficult. What I need from you is partnership, not protection." "You have both," Daniel said, kissing her palm. "Always." They lay together for a few more minutes, stealing quiet before the day's demands separated them. Valeria thought about the cabinet meeting ahead. About the trade symposium where she'd have to perform brilliance while men watched for her to stumble. She thought about the networks she was carefully expanding, the legitimate operations that would benefit from her ministerial access, the delicate balance between public service and private empire. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what she'd been born to do. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." Daniel kissed her forehead. "Now let's get up before we're late and give them more ammunition." They rose, dressed, moved through their morning routine with the practiced coordination of partners who understood each other's rhythms. As Valeria applied her makeup, subtle, professional, nothing that could be called vain, she caught Daniel's reflection in the mirror, adjusting his tie with the same careful precision he brought to everything. This was her life now, public, scrutinized, powerful in ways her father had never imagined. And she would excel at it, no matter how many men tried to diminish her. She would make them respect her. She already had. The cabinet meeting was exactly as tedious as Valeria had anticipated. President Salazar presided with his usual mix of authority and political calculation, while ministers jockeyed for position and influence. Valeria had learned to navigate these dynamics, speak when her expertise was needed, remain silent when politics required it, never show frustration at the inevitable condescension. "Minister Cruz Morales," the president said, turning to her as they discussed the proposed North American Import Facilitation Agreement. "Your assessment of the American position?" All eyes turned to her. Some curious, some skeptical, a few openly hostile. She met their gazes calmly, her posture perfect, her voice steady. "Senator Park assures me that the Senate Trade Committee will support ratification if we can demonstrate verifiable supply chain security," she said. "The American concern isn't about volume of trade, but about transparency and tracking. They want to know what crosses their borders and who controls it. And can we provide that transparency?" This from the Interior Minister, a man who'd made no secret of his belief that a woman, especially an Afro-Mexican woman, had no place in such a critical position. "We can and will," Valeria replied smoothly. "I'm implementing a digital tracking system that will monitor imports from point of origin through final destination. Complete visibility, complete accountability." "At what cost?" "Less than the economic damage of continued trade friction." She pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. Current border delays cost Mexican exporters approximately $4 billion annually. The tracking system costs $200 million to implement, pays for itself within 8 weeks. She walked them through the data, the projections, the diplomatic framework she'd been quietly negotiating with Daniel's committee. It was brilliant work. She knew it. And watching their faces, they knew it too. Even the Interior Minister couldn't find fault with the economics. "This seems quite favorable to American interests," someone observed. "Are we giving too much?" "We're giving transparency in exchange for access," Valeria said, "which is what trade partnerships require. The alternative is continued friction, continued economic loss, and the risk that American manufacturers simply source from other countries." President Salazar nodded slowly. "And your husband supports this framework?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Was she compromised by her marriage? Was she serving American interests over Mexican ones? "Senator Park supports rational trade policy," Valeria said carefully. "As do I. Our marriage doesn't change the fact that both our countries benefit from reduced friction and increased commerce. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about creating systems that work for everyone." Easy to say when you're married to an American senator. The comment came from the defense minister, his tone just barely respectful enough to avoid direct insubordination. Valeria felt her anger rise but kept it tightly controlled. "My marriage to Senator Park gives me unique insight into American political priorities," she said, her voice cool. which I use to negotiate better outcomes for Mexico. Unless the cabinet believes that understanding our largest trading partner is somehow a liability? Silence. No one wanted to explicitly argue that ignorance was preferable to knowledge. President Salazar cleared his throat. I think we can all agree that Minister Cruz Morales has Mexico's interests at heart. The question is whether this agreement serves those interests adequately. They debated for another hour, picking apart her proposal, suggesting modifications, asserting their own importance. Valeria handled each challenge with the same calm competence, never defensive, always prepared. By the time the meeting concluded, she had secured preliminary approval for the framework, pending further negotiations. Well done, the foreign minister said as they gathered their materials. You handled that elegantly. Thank you. Though you should know, there are concerns about your relationship with Senator Park, about whether you can truly be impartial. I can, Valeria said firmly. My loyalty is to Mexico and to sound policy. In that order. I believe you, but others don't. Be careful, Minister. The higher you rise, the more people wait for you to fall. She left the meeting feeling the weight of visibility more acutely than ever. Every decision scrutinized, every word analyzed for hidden meaning, every connection to Daniel treated as potential compromise. It was the price of the power she'd claimed, but that didn't make it less exhausting. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car, a text from Daniel. How did it go? Survived. Barely. Cabinet thinks I'm an American spy. Want me to prove I'm actually your spy? Despite her frustration, Valeria smiled. Tonight. Your place or mine? Ours. It's all ours. The reminder steadied her. Whatever challenges she faced professionally, she had this, a partnership built on genuine love and mutual respect. That was worth the scrutiny, the suspicion, the endless questions about her loyalty. She just had to prove she could navigate both worlds without sacrificing either. The trade symposium that afternoon brought together business leaders, government officials, and journalists, all gathered to discuss the future of North American commerce. Valeria delivered the keynote address, her speech carefully crafted to appeal to Mexican nationalism while advocating for deeper integration. We stand at a crossroads, she told the audience, her voice carrying across the ballroom of the Four Seasons. We can retreat into protectionism, building walls that ultimately impoverish us all. Or we can build bridges, smart bridges, secured bridges, that allow commerce to flow while maintaining sovereignty and security. The applause was measured as she'd expected. Half the room appreciated her vision. The other half saw her as too accommodating to American interests. But she'd anticipated the division, had structured her speech to give both camps something to embrace. During the networking session that followed, Valeria found herself cornered by a journalist from Reforma, a woman whose previous articles had questioned Valeria's fitness for her position. Minister Cruz Morales, some observers suggest your marriage to Senator Park creates an inherent conflict of interest. How do you respond? Valeria's smile didn't waver. I'd suggest those observers understand neither marriage nor trade policy. My husband and I share similar views on economic integration because we're both pragmatists who understand that prosperity requires cooperation. That alignment existed before our marriage and would exist regardless of our relationship. But you must admit the optics are complicated. The optics of a successful woman married to a successful man? Valeria's tone sharpened slightly. I find it interesting that male ministers married to businesswomen never face this question. The complexity seems to exist only in the minds of people who can't imagine a woman negotiating from strength. The journalist blinked, recalibrating. You're saying gender is the real issue? I'm saying competence should be the only issue, and my record speaks for itself. She moved away before the conversation could continue, her composure intact, but her patience wearing thin. Everywhere she went, the same questions, the same insinuations. Her marriage was either a conflict of interest or a political calculation. Her beauty was either an asset she leveraged or a distraction from her incompetence. Her race was either a diversity checkbox or evidence of reverse discrimination. Never just competence. Never just merit. You handled that well, a voice said behind her. Valeria turned to find Ambassador Chen, the Chinese representative to Mexico, offering her a knowing smile. The journalist was fishing for a scandal. She won't find one. No, but she'll keep looking. They always do. For women in power. Ambassador Chen sipped her wine. In my country, we say that a man is judged by his achievements, but a woman is judged by her potential failures. Every success is expected. Every mistake is catastrophic. That's depressingly accurate. It is. But you know what else is true? We work harder, prepare more thoroughly, and ultimately prove more capable than the men who question us. Your track record in 3 months has been impeccable, Minister. They can't actually fault your work, so they fault your marriage instead. Valeria appreciated the solidarity, rare in rooms dominated by male egos and political calculation. Thank you, Ambassador. Don't thank me. Just keep excelling. That's the revenge. The symposium continued for another 2 hours, Valeria navigating conversations with the practiced ease that had served her in business and now served her in government. But beneath her professional facade, she felt the pressure mounting, the constant scrutiny, the endless performance, to the exhaustion of proving herself repeatedly while men with half her competence were simply assumed capable. By the time she returned home that evening, she was depleted. Daniel was already there, having finished his committee work early, and he took one look at her face and simply pulled her into his arms. That bad? He murmured against her hair. Just tired. Tired of defending my competence, my marriage, my right to exist in spaces that weren't designed for me. You don't have to defend anything to me. I know. She pulled back to look at him. That's why I love you. You're the only place I don't have to perform. Daniel kissed her softly, then led her to the couch where he'd already prepared dinner, simple pasta, wine, comfort food. They ate quietly, the ease between them a balm against the day's frustrations. I got a call today, Daniel said eventually, from Senator Morrison. He chairs the Foreign Relations Committee. Valeria's political instincts activated immediately. Morrison was powerful, influential, and known for his hardline stance on border security. What did he want? To discuss our marriage, specifically whether it creates complications for my committee work on trade policy. And you said? That my wife is one of the most capable policy minds I've encountered, and our marriage gives me valuable insight into Mexican priorities. Daniel's expression was tight. He suggested it might be better if you took a less visible role, that your ministerial position draws unnecessary attention to our relationship. Valeria felt ice spread through her chest. He wants me to step down. He didn't say that explicitly, but the implication was clear. And what did you tell him? Daniel met her eyes steadily. That my wife's career is her own, and I support her completely. That if the committee has concerns about my objectivity, they're welcome to review my voting record and find nothing compromised by personal relationships. Relief and love surged through her. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for basic respect, Valeria. You're brilliant at your job. Anyone suggesting otherwise is either threatened by your competence or operating from bias. Still, I know it puts you in a difficult position. No more difficult than the position you're in, married to an American senator while serving in the Mexican government. He pulled her closer. We knew this would be complicated. We chose each other anyway. I'd choose you again, Valeria said quietly, even knowing everything that came with it. Same. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding each other against the pressures that pushed at them from all sides. Valeria thought about Morrison's suggestion, about the growing scrutiny of their marriage, about how visibility brought power but also vulnerability. She wouldn't step down, wouldn't soften her ambitions or hide her capabilities to make men more comfortable. But she also knew that battles were coming, battles that would test not just her political skill, but the foundation of her marriage. For now, she had Daniel's support. His love, his respect, his willingness to stand with her against the criticism. She just hoped it would be enough when the real pressure arrived. 3 weeks later, Daniel received a call that changed everything. He was in his Senate office when his chief of staff entered with the particular expression that meant serious trouble. Valeria was in Mexico City for a series of meetings, and Daniel had planned to join her the following day. Instead, he found himself sitting across from his chief of staff, reading a classified briefing that made his stomach turn to stone. "When did this investigation begin?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "6 months ago, apparently. The Department of Homeland Security flagged certain irregularities in cargo manifests from Cruz Morales logistics subsidiaries. Nothing concrete, just statistical anomalies that suggested selective reporting." Daniel's mind raced through implications. 6 months ago meant before Valeria's ministerial appointment, possibly before their marriage, but certainly while they were publicly together. What kind of anomalies? Container weights that don't match declared contents, shipments routed through unusual ports, financial transactions that suggest payment for services not listed on customs declarations. His chief of staff paused. They're not accusing her of anything yet. They're just mapping. Mapping what? The infrastructure, the network, who works with her, who benefits from her operations, where the money flows. Daniel felt the floor shift beneath him. He'd known Valeria's business was complex, had suspected it involved operations that existed in gray areas of legality. They'd had an unspoken agreement. He wouldn't ask questions he didn't need answers to, and she wouldn't involve him in anything that could compromise his position. But mapping suggested something more systematic, something that couldn't be dismissed as aggressive business practices or accounting creativity. "Is my name in this briefing?" he asked. "No, they're very careful to separate you from any investigation. Right now you're just context." The senator married to a woman whose business practices are under scrutiny. "And if this becomes public?" His chief of staff's expression was grim. "Then we have a serious problem. The optics of a U.S. senator married to someone potentially involved in customs fraud. Allegedly involved? Allegedly. But allegations destroy careers as effectively as convictions." Daniel stood, pacing to his window overlooking the Capitol. Outside, the machinery of government continued its relentless work, indifferent to individual lives caught in its mechanisms. He thought about Valeria, about her brilliance and discipline, about the empire she'd inherited and expanded. He thought about his own ambitions, about the political future he'd carefully constructed. And he thought about love, whether it was strong enough to survive what was coming. "What do they want from me?" he asked finally. "Right now? Nothing. But that could change. If this investigation deepens, if they find something concrete, they may ask you to cooperate, to provide information about your wife's business operations." "I don't have information to provide. We keep our professional lives separate." "They may not believe that." Daniel turned from the window. "Then they'll have to accept it as truth because it is. I love my wife. I trust her integrity. And I will not be used as leverage against her." "Even if it means your career?" The question hung in the air, brutal in its simplicity. Daniel had spent 2 decades building toward this moment: the Senate seat, the committee chairmanship he was positioned to claim, the influence that came with seniority and expertise. Everything he'd worked for could vanish if his marriage became a liability. "I need to call Valeria," he said, instead of answering. "Daniel, she deserves to know. She needs to prepare." His chief of staff nodded reluctantly. Be careful what you say on the phone. If they're investigating her business, they may be monitoring communications. The paranoia was setting in already, the assumption of surveillance and exposure. Daniel felt anger rise, not at Valeria, but at the systems that would punish her for being powerful, for being visible, for daring to marry someone in government while running an empire. After his chief of staff left, Daniel sat at his desk for a long time, staring at his phone. Finally, he composed a careful text. Need to talk. Tonight, in person. Important but not urgent. Valeria's response came minutes later. I'll fly back early. Landing at 8. He met her at Reagan National, watching her emerge from the private terminal with her usual composed elegance. But he could see the concern in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She knew something was wrong. They didn't talk in the car. Too exposed, too uncertain about who might be listening. Instead, they drove to a park in Arlington, walked until they found a secluded bench, sat close with the pretense of romantic privacy. Tell me, Valeria said quietly. Daniel told her everything. The investigation, the irregularities, the mapping of her networks. She listened without interruption, her expression giving nothing away, but he felt her hand tighten on his. How long have they been watching? She asked when he finished. 6 months, officially, but probably longer. And you? They're keeping me separate for now. But if this escalates, it will, Valeria said with certainty. This is what I've always known could happen. Visibility brings scrutiny. Power attracts attention. I took the ministerial position knowing it would shine light on everything I've built. Can you withstand the scrutiny? She was quiet for a long moment. The legitimate operations can. They're clean, properly documented, in beyond reproach. The other things. She paused. I've already moved them offshore, separated them from anything bearing my name. But investigators are thorough. If they look hard enough, they'll find connections. What kind of connections? Valeria met his eyes, the kind that prove I'm my father's daughter in every way that matters. Daniel felt something crack in his chest. Not love-breaking, but certainty fracturing. He'd known, abstractly, that Valeria's empire was built on more than freight forwarding. But hearing her confirm it, hearing the reality behind his willful ignorance, forced a reckoning he'd been avoiding. I need to know, he said carefully. Not details, not specifics, but scope. Are we talking about tax optimization? Or something more serious? We're talking about understanding that borders exist on paper more than practice, that commerce flows through channels both official and unofficial, that my father built an empire on serving markets that governments pretend don't exist. She spoke without apology, her voice steady. I've legitimized as much as possible, made the legal operations so successful they overshadow everything else. But yes, Daniel, if they dig deep enough, they'll find things that can't survive sunlight. And your ministerial position? Gives me cover. Makes investigation politically complex. No one wants to accuse a sitting Mexican minister of criminal activity without absolute proof. She laughed without humor. Ironically, the visibility that drew scrutiny also protects me from it. Daniel processed this, understanding the architecture she'd built, layers of protection, legitimate success, masking illegitimate operations, political position as both target and shield. What do we do? He asked. You do nothing. You maintain distance, you focus on your work, you let me handle this. I can't just abandon you to an investigation. You're not abandoning me, you're protecting both of us. Valeria's hand cupped his face. Daniel, I love you. Which is why I won't let my past destroy your future. If this investigation intensifies, if they find what they're looking for, you need to be insulated. I won't throw you aside to save my career. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust that I can navigate this while protecting us both. He wanted to argue, to insist they face everything together. But he also understood that Valeria had spent her entire life preparing for exactly this scenario. She knew how to survive scrutiny. He was still learning. "Tell me what you need from me," he said finally. "Love me, trust me, and let me do what I do best." They sat together as night fell, holding each other against the cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Daniel thought about choices, about consequences, about the price of loving someone who operated in shadows even as she stood in spotlights. He'd chosen her knowing she was complicated. Now he had to choose her knowing she was dangerous. The question was whether his love was strong enough to survive that knowledge. Over the following weeks, the investigation remained quiet but persistent. Valeria learned through her own intelligence sources, networks inherited from her father, contacts who understood that information was the most valuable commodity, that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security was building a comprehensive picture of her operations. They'd interviewed former employees, analyzed shipping manifests going back 5 years, traced financial flows through multiple jurisdictions. They were professional, methodical, and utterly relentless. "They're not looking for a quick arrest," her attorney said during a secure video call. "They're building an empire-level case, the kind that takes down entire organizations." "Then we give them nothing to find," Valeria said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline racing through her system. "Every questionable operation goes darker. Every legitimate business becomes irreproachably clean. We separate until no connection exists, except in their imaginations. That takes time. Then we buy time." She used every tool available, her ministerial position to create diplomatic complications, her legitimate business success to muddy investigative waters, her marriage to Daniel to introduce political sensitivity. Not to stop the investigation, but to slow it, to force them to be more careful, to create space for restructuring. Daniel, meanwhile, faced his own pressures. Senator Morrison requested a meeting, ostensibly about trade policy but actually about Valeria. "Your wife is brilliant," Morrison said, his tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. "Her work on the import facilitation agreement is impressive, perhaps too impressive." "I'm not sure I understand," Daniel replied, though he understood perfectly. "She's positioned herself at the center of North American trade policy. As Mexico's minister, she shapes their priorities. As your wife, she influences yours. That level of convergence raises questions." "Questions about what?" "About whether she's serving Mexico's interests or building her own infrastructure." Daniel felt anger flash through him but kept his expression neutral. "Minister Cruz Morales is one of the most capable trade policy experts I've encountered. The fact that she's also my wife doesn't change her competence." "No, but it changes perception. And in politics, perception matters." "What are you suggesting, Senator?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with the calculation of a man used to wielding power. "That you might want to create some distance, public distance. Let people see that your policy positions are independent of your marriage." "My policy positions are independent. I've advocated for smart trade policy since before I met Valeria." "Then prove it. Vote against her next major initiative." The suggestion landed like a blow. Morrison was asking him to publicly undermine his wife, to sacrifice her political capital to protect his own reputation. "No," Daniel said flatly. "Excuse me? I won't sabotage my wife's work to assuage baseless concerns about my independence. If you have questions about my voting record, review it. You'll find I vote based on policy merit, not personal relationships." Morrison's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Hyde Park. Your wife is becoming a liability. The smart play is to distance yourself before that liability destroys your career." "My wife is the best thing in my life," Daniel said, standing. "And I won't betray her to climb a political ladder. If that limits my advancement, so be it." He left Morrison's office feeling both righteous and terrified. He'd just potentially sacrificed his political future for a marriage that was increasingly under siege. But the alternative, publicly undermining Valeria, was unthinkable. That evening, he told her about the meeting. They were in her Mexico City penthouse, having dinner on her terrace overlooking the city lights. Valeria listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "He wants you to vote against me," she said when he finished. "Yes." "And you refused?" "Of course I refused." Valeria set down her wine glass, her hands trembling slightly, the first sign of emotional distress he'd seen from her in weeks. "Daniel, you can't sacrifice your career for me. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent." "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm maintaining my integrity." "Politics doesn't care about integrity. It cares about perception and survival." "Then maybe I don't belong in politics." The words hung between them, shocking in their finality. Daniel had spent 2 decades building his political career, had sacrificed relationships and opportunities for advancement. But sitting across from Valeria, seeing the strain on her beautiful face, he realized something fundamental had shifted. He loved her more than he loved power. "Don't say that," Valeria said quietly. "Don't give up everything you've worked for because of me. I'm not giving it up because of you. I'm choosing you over it. There's a difference." She stood, pacing to the edge of the terrace, her back to him. Daniel watched the tension in her shoulders, the careful control she maintained even in moments of crisis. She was magnificent, he thought. Powerful and vulnerable, strong and scared, human and extraordinary all at once. "I don't want to be the reason you fail," she said without turning. "You could never be. Whatever happens to my career, it won't be because I loved you. It will be because I chose truth over convenience." Valeria turned then, tears on her cheeks. Rare and precious, a gift of her vulnerability. "I love you so much, and I'm terrified that loving me will destroy you." Daniel crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, felt her shaking against him. "Nothing about loving you could ever destroy me. You've made me better, stronger, clearer about what actually matters. Politics matters to you. You matter more." They held each other as the city glittered below, as the pressure mounted around them, as the investigation continued its slow, methodical dismantling of the walls she'd built to protect her empire. Later, in her bed, after making love with the desperate tenderness of people clinging to each other in a storm, Daniel said what he'd been thinking for weeks. "Whatever they find, whatever comes out, I'm not leaving you." Valeria's fingers traced patterns on his chest. "Even if what they find is worse than you imagine? I don't care what they find. I care about you, about us." "That's noble. It's also naive." "Maybe. But it's true." She was quiet for a long time. "My father once told me that love was a luxury people in power couldn't afford, that it made you vulnerable, gave your enemies leverage. What do you think?" "I think he was wrong. Love doesn't make me weak. It makes me fight harder to protect what matters." She kissed him softly. "You matter, Daniel. More than the empire, more than the position, more than any of it. Then we face this together. No more protecting me, no more insisting I stay separate. Whatever comes, we handle it as partners." "As partners," Valeria agreed, though her voice carried shadows of doubt. They fell asleep tangled together, seeking comfort in physical closeness as the world outside grew increasingly hostile. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, some pressure point that would eventually force a choice neither of them wanted to make. He just didn't know what that choice would be yet. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 months into the investigation. Valeria was in a cabinet meeting when her chief of staff interrupted with urgent news. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York had issued a request for her testimony regarding Irregularities in customs documentation and international financial transactions. Not an arrest warrant, not even a formal accusation, just a request to testify, voluntarily, about her business operations. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. "This is outrageous," President Salazar said after she briefed him privately. "An American investigation targeting a sitting Mexican minister? It's a sovereignty issue." "It's a leverage issue," Valeria corrected. "They can't investigate me easily while I hold this position, so they're trying to force my hand. Either I resign to fight the investigation, or I refuse to testify and look guilty." "Can you refuse?" "I'm a Mexican citizen holding a Mexican government position. I'm under no legal obligation to cooperate with an American investigation." She paused. "But refusing looks like I have something to hide." Salazar studied her with the shrewd calculation that had won him the presidency. "Do you have something to hide?" Valeria met his eyes steadily. "I have built a successful international business by understanding markets and serving them efficiently. If American investigators want to interpret efficiency as illegality, that's their choice. But nothing I've done violates Mexican law." It was technically true. She'd been scrupulous about Mexican compliance while navigating American regulations more creatively. But Salazar heard what she didn't say. "I need you to handle this carefully," he said finally. "You're too valuable to lose, but I can't have the government defending criminal activity." "I understand, Mr. President." "Do you?" "Because if this investigation reveals something truly damaging, I'll have no choice but to ask for your resignation." "I understand," Valeria repeated, "and I'll resign before allowing any scandal to touch your administration." She left the presidential residence feeling the walls closing in. The investigation had been theoretical before, something happening in shadows. Now it was concrete, official, demanding response. And she called Daniel immediately. "They've summoned me," she said when he answered. "Southern District of New York. They want me to testify." She heard him inhale sharply. "When?" "2 weeks. Voluntary testimony about customs and financial irregularities." "Voluntary meaning if you refuse, they escalate." "Exactly. What are you going to do?" Valeria looked out at Mexico City, at the empire she'd built and the position she'd claimed. "I'm going to testify. I'm going to be calm, professional, and completely unshakable. And I'm going to give them nothing they can use." "Valeria, I know the risks, but refusing makes me look guilty. This way, I control the narrative." "You need a lawyer. The best lawyer money can buy." "I have one. Several, actually." "I want to be there." "Absolutely not," Valeria said firmly. "Daniel, when you can't be anywhere near this, it's exactly the connection they want to make. The senator and his questionable wife, coordinating stories. I don't care about optics." "I do. Because if they can connect you to my business operations, they destroy both of us. This way, I take the heat, you stay clear, and we survive." She heard his frustration, his desire to stand beside her despite the danger. But she also heard his understanding that she was right. "I hate this," he said quietly. "So do I. But it's the hand we're playing. I love you. I love you too. Which is why I need you to trust me on this." After they hung up, Valeria sat in silence, thinking through scenarios. The testimony would be hostile, designed to trap her in contradictions or force admissions. Men they'd have evidence, the irregularities they'd been mapping for months, and they'd use it to pressure her into cooperation. But she'd spent her entire life preparing for interrogation. Her father had trained her in how to answer questions without revealing information, how to use truth selectively, how to maintain composure under pressure designed to break it. She would survive this. She would protect her empire and her husband. She just had to be perfect under circumstances designed to expose any flaw. The deposition took place in a conference room in Lower Manhattan, sterile and formal, designed to intimidate. Valeria arrived in a navy suit, her hair pulled back, her makeup understated. She looked like exactly what she was, a government minister and successful businesswoman with nothing to hide. The assistant U.S. attorney conducting the questioning was a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and humorless. "Thank you for agreeing to testify, Minister Cruz Morales. Of course. I'm happy to clarify any misunderstandings about my business operations." They started with background, her education, her work history, her inheritance of Cruz Morales logistics. Valeria answered calmly, providing exactly enough information to seem cooperative without offering anything beyond what they asked. Then they moved to specifics. "Can you explain why container CML 44782, shipped from Veracruz to Los Angeles on March 15, 2024, showed a weight variance of 2,000 kilograms between Mexican and American customs declarations?" Valeria didn't hesitate. Container weights can vary depending on when and how they're measured. Cargo shifts, moisture affects weight. Measurement equipment has tolerances. A variance of that size is within normal parameters for cross-border shipping. Even when that variance occurs in 40% of your shipments? If you're seeing patterns across many shipments, it suggests systematic measurement differences between Mexican and American equipment, not deliberate misreporting. The attorney pulled up documents, walked her through dozens of similar irregularities. Each time, Valeria provided reasonable explanations, timing differences, measurement variations, documentation errors that had been corrected. She never admitted wrongdoing, never showed nervousness. "Your company processes approximately 50,000 containers annually," the attorney said. "Are you claiming that 40% show measurement errors?" "I'm claiming that measurement is imperfect, and that international shipping involves variables that create apparent discrepancies when examined by people looking for them." "People like federal investigators?" "People who don't understand the complexity of international logistics," Valeria corrected smoothly. Hours passed. They questioned her about financial flows, about relationships with customs officials, about shell corporations and offshore accounts. Valeria navigated each topic with the same careful precision, acknowledging what was public record, offering explanations for what seemed questionable, revealing nothing that could serve as evidence of actual criminality. "Let's talk about your marriage," the attorney said eventually. Valeria felt her guard rise but kept her expression neutral. "What about it?" "Your husband is Senator Daniel Park, who chairs the Senate Trade Subcommittee. Don't you think that creates a conflict of interest?" "My husband and I discuss policy philosophically. We don't coordinate our professional decisions." "But you must see how it looks. A Mexican minister married to an American senator, both working on trade policy that benefits your private business." "My business benefits from good policy the same way any efficient operation does. The fact that I'm married to someone who understands trade doesn't change that I built my company before I met him." "But you've expanded significantly since your marriage." "I've expanded because I'm good at what I do." The attorney smiled thinly. "Or because you have unusual access to information and influence." "If you're suggesting I've engaged in insider trading or corruption, make the accusation clearly," Valeria said, her voice hardening slightly. "Otherwise, stop insinuating that successful women must have achieved their success through their husbands." The room went quiet. Valeria had pushed back, deliberately, knowing they wanted her compliant and defensive. But she also knew that appearing too cooperative made you look guilty. "I'm suggesting your marriage creates complications," the attorney said carefully. "My marriage is none of your business. Unless you're prepared to question every congressman married to a businesswoman, my personal life is irrelevant to your investigation." They continued for another hour, circling back to financial questions, to shipping irregularities, to anything they thought might crack her composure. Valeria held firm, answering each question with the minimum necessary information, never volunteering anything, never showing fear. When they finally concluded, the attorney gave her a cold smile. "Thank you for your cooperation, Minister. We'll be in touch if we have further questions." "I look forward to it," Valeria lied. She left the building feeling wrung out but victorious. She'd given them nothing actionable, nothing that could form the basis of charges. They had irregularities, but irregularities weren't crimes. They had suspicions, but suspicions weren't evidence. Daniel called as her car pulled away from the courthouse. "How did it go?" "I survived. Gave them nothing they can use." "I'm so proud of you." "Don't be proud yet. This was just round one." That night, back in their Georgetown townhouse, Valeria collapsed into Daniel's arms with the exhaustion of someone who'd been performing under extreme pressure for 8 hours. He held her, asked no questions, just provided the safety of his presence. "Thank you," she murmured against his chest. "For what?" "For not asking what they found, for trusting me." "I do trust you," Daniel said. "Completely." She looked up at him, saw the truth in his eyes, felt something in her chest crack open. He loved her despite everything: the investigation, the scrutiny, the possibility that she'd built her empire on foundations that couldn't survive daylight. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "You don't—" "I do." She pulled back, met his eyes. "When my father died, he left me more than a business. He left me a network, an infrastructure that serves markets most governments pretend don't exist. I've legitimized as much as possible, but the foundation is built on understanding that commerce follows demand, regardless of laws." Daniel was very still. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if they dig deep enough, past all the layers I've built, they'll find things that can't be explained as measurement errors or documentation mistakes. Things my father built and I maintained because they're profitable and because I'm good at it. Valeria, I needed you to hear it from me, before they find it, before it becomes a weapon. I needed you to know that I'm not innocent, Daniel. I'm just very, very careful." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Valeria watched Daniel process what she'd admitted. He watched him weigh love against principle, partnership against self-preservation. Finally, he spoke. "How bad? Not violent, not exploitative, but definitely illegal by American standards." She paused. "I move things that people want moved. I facilitate commerce that exists whether I'm involved or not. And I do it more efficiently and safely than anyone else in the market." That's a rationalization. It's the truth. I'm not a drug lord or a weapons dealer. I'm a businesswoman who understands that markets operate outside legal frameworks. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing carefully. When he opened them, his expression was pained but resolute. "I don't know how to reconcile this, the woman I love with the criminal activity you're describing." "Then don't reconcile it. Just know that both are true. And if they prove it, if they build a case, then I'll deal with consequences, but I won't let those consequences destroy you. We're married. Your consequences are mine. Not if we create distance. Not if you can honestly say you knew nothing about the specifics." "I know now." "No," Valeria said firmly. "You know I've told you something vague about my business operations. You don't know details. You don't know partners. You don't know methods. You can truthfully say your wife made some admission you didn't fully understand, and you certainly didn't participate in any illegal activity." Daniel stared at her, understanding her strategy. She was protecting him, giving him plausible deniability, ensuring that whatever happened to her couldn't touch him. "I don't want protection," he said. "I want truth." "You can't have both. Not in this situation." They stood there, the space between them suddenly vast despite their physical closeness. Valeria felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She'd made her choice long ago, to build power regardless of cost. Now she was paying that cost, and the currency was the man she loved understanding exactly who she was. "I still love you," Daniel said finally. "That hasn't changed. Even knowing what you know? Even knowing." He pulled her back into his arms. "I don't approve. I don't endorse it. But I love you anyway." It wasn't the unconditional acceptance she'd secretly hoped for, but it was honest. And in that moment, Valeria valued honesty more than comfort. "Thank you," she whispered. They held each other in the darkness, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. And the investigation would continue. The pressure would intensify. And eventually, they would face a choice that might require sacrificing everything they'd built together. But for now, they had this imperfect truth and complicated love. It would have to be enough. The call came at 2 a.m., pulling Daniel from uneasy sleep. He recognized the number. His intelligence contact at the CIA, someone he'd worked with on trade security issues. "Senator Park? I apologize for the hour, but you need to hear this." Daniel extracted himself carefully from Valeria's sleeping form, moved to his study. "I'm listening." "There's a classified briefing scheduled for tomorrow. Foreign Intelligence Committee, restricted attendance. It's about your wife." Daniel's stomach turned to ice. "What about her?" "I can't give details over the phone, but Senator, it's not what you think. She's not the target." "Then what is she?" A pause. "Infrastructure. They're mapping her as infrastructure." The line went dead. Daniel stood in the darkness, his mind racing through implications. Infrastructure wasn't pursued, it was controlled. Utilized. Exploited. They didn't want to destroy Valeria's empire. They wanted to own it. He looked back toward the bedroom where his wife slept, unaware that the investigation had just shifted from criminal prosecution to something far more dangerous. The U.S. government had apparently decided that Valeria Cruz Morales wasn't a problem to solve. She was an asset to acquire.